Hello and welcome to everyone on the line. We're so glad you could join us for today's webinar, How Digitization Can Help You Grow Your Apparel Brand Globally. This event was organized by the United States Fashion Industry Association, representing brands, retailers, importers, and wholesalers based in the U.S. and doing business globally, as well as our friends at Sarai. My name is Shannon Brady. I'm the Communications Director at USFIA, and I'll be your moderator today. A few technical notes before we begin. The first is that questions can be submitted at any time during the live program. Simply click on the question header on your webinar control panel, type your text into the box, and hit send. Our presenters will address as many questions as possible at the end of the program. We'll also have a few poll questions throughout our program today. To take a poll, it'll pop up on your screen. Simply click your answer and press submit. And of course, if for some reason we experience a technical difficulty and lose audio, please refer to the chat box for further instructions. A reminder that all registered participants will receive a copy of the slide deck and a recording of today's program later today. Now I'd like to take a moment to introduce our presenters for the day. With us, we have Vivek Ramachandran, CEO of Sarai. Before Sarai, Vivek was the global head of growth and innovation for HSBC Commercial Banking. He was responsible for coordinating key strategic growth initiatives, exploring new business models, and driving the adoption of new technologies. Also joining us today is Stanley Stetso, Executive Chairman of Lever Style, Inc. Lever Style is a product partner of e-commerce pioneers such as Bonobos, Stitch Fix, and Boden, fashion leaders including Theory, Hugo Boss, and Paul Smith, and activewear brands such as Helly Hansen and Jay Lindbergh. Thank you so much for being with us today, and without further delay, I'll hand the floor over to you, Vivek.
Thank you, Shannon, and delighted to talk to all of you. So good morning, everybody. As Shannon mentioned, today we're going to talk about how digitization can help you grow your brand globally. Today's webinar, we've got three topics. I'm going to start with a perspective on why the industry must embrace digital opportunities, and not for all the obvious reasons, but for threats and opportunities that are emerging. I'll give you an introduction and an overview of who Sarai is and how we're helping the industry. And then most excitingly, I'll look forward to a conversation with Stanley Stetso. Stanley is the chairman of Lever Style, as Shannon mentioned, and Lever Style is one of the most innovative manufacturers that we've come across in the work that we've been doing across Asia. So keen to hear his perspective on how manufacturers are using technology to capture new opportunities. Let's start with two simple polling questions. Shannon, if you can put them up to get things started. The first is a very simple yes/no question. So is digitization a priority for your company in 2021? This is just to set the scene. I'm expecting, hopefully, an overwhelming, if not everyone saying yes on this one. But I'd be keen to have it anonymous, so I'd be keen to have an open and honest view on whether it is a priority for you.
Yes, so we'll give our attendees another few seconds to take the poll before we share the answers.
And I must admit, it's not unusual to talk to companies and say, I know we should say it is a priority for us, but the reality right now is in the world we're in survival mode. And digitization sounds good, but it's not a real emphasis for us. So keen to hear what your honest opinion on how important it is to your company. Okay.
Yes, so we'll go ahead and share those results.
And let's also take, interesting. So 1 in 4 of you don't see it as a priority in 2021. And hopefully with the questions that you could ask along the way, keen to understand why not or what stands in the way. And the second question is, for those of you for whom digitization is a priority, what is the main focus of your digitization efforts? Now, it doesn't have to be exclusive, but I've picked the three most common themes, or the first two are the most common themes when I talk to brands all over the world, which is whether it is to enhance your customer proposition, i.e. sell more, or to reduce costs. I've added a third as a leading indicator of where what I'm going to emphasize what I believe a big driver of digitization could be, or maybe there are other reasons. So why are you focused on digitization, or what is your main focus for your digitization efforts?
So again, we'll give our audience members another few seconds to complete the poll before we share the results. So make sure you get your answers in.
And all I'm trying to do is just set a baseline from which we can structure the discussion.
So thank you to everyone who took the poll. We'll go ahead and share the results.
Okay, interesting. So almost half of you, as I would have expected, are focusing your digitization efforts on the consumer end or your customer end of the proposition, roughly a little less than a third on reducing costs, and 1 in 6 or so on supply chain transparency, and everyone else has other factors, which do jump in the chat and point out our questions and what those factors are. My starting premise is, I think we all would agree, our world has changed. And there's some changes that we've seen in the COVID world that are likely to be permanent. There are 4 in particular that I'd highlight. Stanley is in China as we speak, and he was just telling Shannon and me before we started how the world is pretty much back to normal in China. But I contest it's going to be a long while before we jump on planes and do what we used to do, which is try visiting five cities in 2 weeks, walk through multiple factories, go from country to country, 2 weeks in Asia, 2 weeks in the Middle East. That world is unlikely to come back anytime soon. Not just because of fears of COVID, but because I think a lot of us have realized how inefficient that world is. The need to fly across to meet someone when you could do that digitally has fundamentally changed, and travel is not going to go back to what it was. The second factor which has changed, most likely permanently, is the mix in product. Not just the nature of product that consumers are buying, but also the size of orders and the flexibility with products that brands are demanding of their manufacturers. And the flip side of that is there has been an element of trust that has been eroded between brands and retailers and manufacturers, especially in some countries where the manufacturers have been left holding stock, and where the trading terms have obviously been skewed towards the buyers. You have manufacturers who feel badly done by. So an element of trust through the supply chain has been shaken, and I think it'll take a while for that to come back. And then finally, at both ends of the spectrum, at the brand end of the spectrum, but also the manufacturer end of the spectrum, business models have changed. Stanley, and I'm excited to talk to Stanley because he's adopted a very design-led manufacturing model. But the fundamental premise of good quality product on time at a competitive price is no longer going to be a differentiator in the world going forward. Manufacturers are going to have to find new tools to differentiate, just like brands will have to do the same with their consumers. These are the COVID-led changes that are unlikely to go back to what they were earlier. But I also think geopolitics is going to change supply chains. In the last 15 years, China has gone from exporting over 70% of all apparel produce that's manufactured, whether it's fabrics or whether it's garments, to actually consuming 70% of the domestic economy. Domestic demand in China will continue, but new trade corridors are going to have to be formed. So in this world that's changing quite a lot, it's important to acknowledge that the apparel industry is unfortunately starting from a relatively low digital quotient. A recent survey identified apparel, the clothing and garment sector, just above agriculture in terms of digital adoption. And that's not a great place to be. And it isn't adoption at the downstream end, but as you go further upstream, the level of digital adoption through the supply chain is incredibly variable. It's also been an industry where digital adoption has been thrust demand-led. So manufacturers have had to comply to multiple standards, submit data to multiple buyers, and there's been a lack of incentive to do more than what's required. Transparency has almost been a negative. And data is incredibly scattered throughout the ecosystem, either in proprietary databases or in third-party systems. And the absence of a consistent set of standards or consistent tools adopted across the industry is a challenge to where the industry is going to go. And the reason when we put the polling question, I added the third factor as to why you're adopting digitization is I believe, and I think the more people in the industry I talk to, that transparency as a critical step towards sustainability is going to be the single largest challenge facing the apparel industry for the next 5, 10, 20 years. 2/3 of companies, and this is based on an HSBC Navigator report, have explicitly increased their ESG targets and explicitly committed. You have brands like Nike where management incentives and bonuses are actually tied to hitting explicitly committed ESG numbers. But less than half the companies are seeking transparency. Without transparency, it's going to be impossible to hit any sustainability objectives. And transparency will not become a nice to have. Transparency will become a must have in the industry. And it's impossible to achieve any transparency or sustainability objectives without the adoption of digital tools. So the industry needs to think about digitization, not just to serve your customers better, not just to take out costs, but more fundamentally to build a much more transparent and, following that, a sustainable supply chain, because that is what I think will set apart the winners from the people who are going to eke out of this crisis and have to struggle through the next decade. And that's going to require a new way of thinking, a completely new way of tackling the issue of transparency. Traceability needs to be at the product level. We are working with many of the leading global brands. There is a lot of lip service in the industry to traceability and transparency, but it's only a handful of companies who are really committed to understanding all the way from cotton to garment, the raw materials going into their products, or whether it's trims or whether it's accessories, what's going into their products, who is upstream. It's important that the industry does this in a way that incentivizes the data providers. So what is in it for a manufacturer to come to the table and share information about where they're sourcing and have this information in a really easy way, which can be independently verified. And that is exactly what we're trying to do at Sarai, which is make it easier for companies to build relationships and to exchange information. So let me tell you a little bit about who we are and what Sarai is trying to do for the industry. We are a subsidiary and a bold initiative by HSBC. HSBC is a trade bank. HSBC is the world's largest trade bank. And I ran the trade finance business for HSBC in London for a few years ago. And myself and a few colleagues, we proposed the idea to the bank to build a platform to simplify trade beyond banking. We've started with the fashion industry. And what we're building is a B2B digital platform to help build trusted relationships. How you and I consume product has fundamentally changed in the last few decades. But how businesses connect with each other, how businesses build relationships with each other, unfortunately, it still looks like 1980. It doesn't feel like 2020. And that's what we're trying to change. And we have had thousands of companies. So we have almost 5,000 companies on the platform today. And as you can see, the adoption curve is moving up. So it took us 300 days to get the first 1,000 companies on the platform and just over 50 days to get the 4,000. So we have an accelerated number of users coming onto the platform, and what they're coming on for changes. So at the small end, we've got buyers coming to find new suppliers to make new connections. We have manufacturers building profiles to connect to new buyers. So I got to meet Stanley when we were setting up Sarai, and Leverstal was one of the early adopters to come and build a profile. And I understand, Stanley, and you can add to it when we talk. Leverstal has actually got now a first order coming in from a buyer found via the Sarai platform. At the larger end, the global brands who we're working with are using the platform to actually get data through their supply chain all the way upstream to actually trace the raw materials going into their product, or to pull complex supply chain insights together in one place. So buyers are using Sarai in multiple different ways, either to find new suppliers, get data and alerts on upstream suppliers, or to build order-level traceability. The platform is built in a very intuitive way, finding new suppliers, connecting with new partners, putting out an RFQ is incredibly intuitive. We are not trying to become a digital intermediary. We don't come between you and the supplier. This is a relationship you build directly with the supplier. What we're trying to do is facilitate the exchange of information to simplify that process. Similarly, with supply chain transparency, this is your supply chain. What we do is give you access to the best possible information, be it from Higgs, be it from credit bureaus, be it from Dun & Bradstreet, be it shipping data, be it sanctions data, be it adverse news, to help you stay informed about who's in your supply chain and what do you need to know about them. And excitingly, we went live in the last quarter with our cotton traceability solution, which is obviously incredibly topical given the US CBP requirement about cotton coming in from Xinjiang or product coming in from Xinjiang. And the platform allows buyers, brands, and retailers to actually trace all the way from cotton to yarn to fabric to garment to shipment. And I love the two quotes below, especially the one which says it feels like voodoo magic, because the industry is so used to collecting data in analog fashions, emails, PDFs, Excel files, and none of this data talks to each other. We simplify that process. The platform's been live now for 18 months. Our fundamental differentiator is it's built for the industry. We don't prescribe a standard. So everything is built from first principles, bottom up. It makes sense for you. We can integrate with multiple data sources. If you have a data provider you're working with, fantastic, we can plug them in. If you have an auditor you want to validate the data, we can give them access. If you have a surveyor you'd like to contribute, they can get access to. And what we're trying to do is build a solution that makes sense for both sides of the market, both for the buyers as well as the sellers. That's the solution that we've built. The solution is live. I'll stop talking about Sarai and get to the meat of the conversation with Stanley about how technology is helping the industry and what manufacturers are doing. But for those of you who are keen to find out more, join Sarai. There's no charge for basic access, or get in touch with myself or anyone on the team to learn more about us. With that as the context and setting stage, let me jump to a conversation with Stanley. Stanley, delighted to have you with us. Where do we have you? Which part of the world are you dialing in from?
Vivek, thank you very much for the very kind introduction. I'm in China at the moment, in Hangzhou.
And so it is little past 10 p.m. for you, so thank you so much for joining us. Lever style is a fascinating manufacturing model. You have taken a traditional manufacturing model and flipped it in its head, where it's the value add through the design process that sets you apart. And you've also taken a traditional manufacturing model and flipped it in its head with willing to work with smaller buyers, smaller order sizes. Tell us a little bit about your business model.
Sure. Yeah, we have we do things quite a bit differently. We have an asset-light model where we actually don't necessarily own the plants that we produce products in, and we also focus on working with the underserved smaller brands. So we're not working with like huge names like Gap, Marks and Spencer's, Walmart. Instead, we work with much smaller names that require smaller order sizes, and they're frankly underserved. And we're also focusing a lot on digitally native customers. About half of our sales goes to these digitally native brands and platforms. And like the other customers that we're serving, they are also tend to be like younger companies. Some are even startups. And so we have about 120 customers. Whereas a typical manufacturer or supplier has, maybe just a handful or even a dozen or two, whereas we're at about 120.
And this focus from a business model perspective is not something that came about after COVID. This is the business you've built. COVID just justified the model, isn't that right?
Well, I wouldn't say that COVID justified the model, but I definitely that direction has been ongoing for quite a while now. And we just noticed where we can, serve, where customers are underserved. A Gap or an M&S, they have so many suppliers, and people are always bidding just on prices and so forth. But a lot of these smaller companies are actually gaining market share, being innovative, and we just thought that it's much better to partner with them than the traditional sort of big brands. And so when we head into COVID, definitely these smaller brands, especially the digitally native ones, have been outperforming the conventional brick and mortar brands.
And how do you spot the next buyer in terms of how do you evaluate who you're going after? So digitally native is obviously one key trait, but what else do you look for to determine whether this is going to be a winning business model and someone you can build a business with?
We actually are not, we don't have a fixed set of criteria, but we look for management teams that are innovative, that are sort of pushing the boundaries, and we just figure out how we can partner with them. And a lot of times we actually work with them on a lot of different product categories. And there are cases now where we like the turnkey supplier, so we take care of the entire production of garments. And that makes it a lot more viable for us. Because normally when people talk to a small buyer, they're like, well, you're just sort of losing money and wait till they get big. And, is it worth investing in it? But if we can find a way to basically break even or even to make a slight profit from day one, it makes it much easier to decide whether to work with a new client.
And manufacturers all over the world have had a difficult crisis. Your financial situation and your business model has allowed you to capitalize on some of the opportunities. You've been acquisitive. Tell us a little bit about your strategy and what you've done in the last year, because it is quite an amazing story.
Yeah, well, I guess sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. In late 2019, our company went public on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange to raise capital for acquisitions. And soon after that, just a few months after that, COVID hit. And obviously our industry has been devastated, and then it's become a buyer's market, and it's a bit easier to come to terms that are acceptable to both the seller and ourselves. So since about 9 years, since middle of last year, we have made 4 acquisitions already and extending our product capabilities across basically an entire wardrobe. And as we speak, we're still looking at multiple opportunities, and hopefully we'll have more to announce soon.
And what ties them together? So let's get to the point on how you adopt technology, because Leverstyle has been at the forefront of trying new things, adopting new technology. Tell us a little bit about how you think about technology in your company.
Well, I guess there are a few things that differentiate us. One is we work with a lot of clients and a lot of orders. If we just use the traditional like Excel and everything's manual, we just don't have enough pair of hands to manage that. So we've been forced to go sort of digital. Another thing that's made us go digital much faster is our focus on digitally native brands and platforms. These sort of customers need things to be quick, speed. And when early in the poll you asked, say, what's the point of digitalization? And when I was thinking about that question, for our company, it's actually speed. But when you get speed, you actually reduce costs, and it's a better customer proposition. So that has sort of made us to be to want to adopt digital solutions much quicker. However, I want to caution something. I think it's very dangerous to digitalize for the sake of digitalization. I think digitalization is a tool to support an overall strategy. So, for example, in our company, we focus on small orders, quick response, a lot of customers, and then digitalization becomes the right tool for us. But if you're just making the same widget for Walmart day in, day out, you're making millions and millions of them, and it rarely changes. Digitalization may not be all that necessary. So I think it's important to think about what your strategies are, and therefore what your business needs are, and what kind of tools you need. But I think for an increasing number of cases, digitalization is going to be important, because right now, even the bigger brands are talking about faster response time. They're talking about smaller orders and spread, and more sort of high mix, low volume. And that means that people just can't afford to have just try to solve that problem with stacks and stacks of people.
And what are the technologies you're using, if you want to highlight a few, that have actually made a difference, that have moved the needle for you?
Yeah, we've just a couple of years ago, we changed to a new ERP system. We're now adopting towards the tail end of implementing a PLM system. We're using virtual showrooming software. We're using CRM software. We're using digital design, 3D design that like Browseware and others. Basically, these are tools to make things quicker. And there are little pockets of little digital solutions that we're adopting that are sort of solving little pain points. And so our goal is to basically build a whole supply chain that's all digitalized, so that there's minimal amount of human data input, or especially the worst thing is data duplication of data input. So, for example, if a brand inputs data, and then the supplier, let's say the buying office inputs data, and then the factory does the same thing. That's basically doing tripling the work, and we're trying to remove that.
And I'm guessing you have the same issue that most manufacturers have, that every buyer wants you to use a different system. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, nowadays, that's always been the case, but nowadays there are more and more of these APIs that, is it called APIs? I forgot. Basically to let two systems talk. So for some of our customers, we're building these bridges so that the two systems can talk. Another thing that's different with us is, most brands, the big buyers are working with, of course, big manufacturers, but relative to the brands, the manufacturers are actually quite small. So imagine a Nike, a Walmart, a Gap, M&S, and so forth. There's no manufacturer that's even 1/10 the size of these folks. But we are actually a little bit different because we work with so many smaller brands. A lot of these smaller brands actually don't have a legacy system, and we can sort of say, hey, customer ABC, please use our system, and we can make things much faster for you. And quite often they're willing to go along with us, and that actually helped us sort of build I wouldn't say dominant, but the base, sort of a digital solution for some of our customers to adopt. And then we get our factories to do the same thing, and then basically minimizing the duplication of data entry and letting the systems talk to each other.
And elaborate a little bit about getting the factories to use the same tools. And when you move upstream through your supply chain, the level of digital adoption falls off a cliff very quickly.
Yes, and one company cannot change the world, so that's not something. We don't have the ambition to get everybody up, 2 steps up the.
That's exactly why we set up. It is for one company to change the world.
Yeah, well, wish you the best of luck, and it seems like you guys are doing a great job.
But talk us through the issue of supply chain transparency and what your thoughts on the industry actually adopting tools, and actually, because the demands for transparency are only getting larger, whether it's investors, whether it's NGOs, whether it's activists, consumers, and now regulators, right? So how do you see the industry dealing with that, and how can technology help?
Well, I may be naive on this, but I think digitalization does not have, or let me put it this way. The most important thing to transparency is actually mindset and people willing to be transparent. It's less about digital solutions. I think once you make that decision that you want to be transparent about your supply chain, there are lots of tools, digital tools you can adopt to help. But even if you don't adopt those tools, once you've made that decision and you want to do it, it's actually even doable manually. So I think that's the mindset and the willingness to be transparent, and of course, to be willing to be transparent, that you have nothing to hide. And so I think it's basically getting businesses to move to that sort of state where people feel that, hey, I've nothing to hide. I'm happy to share with you all everything that I have in the supply chain, and then how to digitalize that to make it a little bit easier is going to be quite relatively easy.
And you, the reason we got working is you were open to trying new ideas even before it was clear what the upside or what the model evolved. And so, what do you see as the future for platforms to pull together buyers and sellers and actually build some level of consistency in data sharing?
I think the field is wide open. I don't think there's one single sort of a platform or that is dominant. I mean, in like let's say taxi hailing services, Uber and then Lyft. In China, it's Didi. They're always like dominant players that have a tremendous market share already. In our industry, there's nobody that's basically created a platform that most people want to are using, and it's we're all I guess different players are trying, and I know that Sarai is making a lot of good inroads, but so far the field's wide open, and I think somebody who actually figures out how to provide the best value to brands as well as factories and other supply chain players, so that people want to join the platform, that will win out. But we're not seeing a clear winner yet. Although obviously, I think Sarai is doing a great job and maybe one of the leaders.
Well, hopefully that ends up being the case. Shannon, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, we have some questions from our audience. And as a reminder to our audience members, you can continue submitting questions using the question header on your dashboard. So our first question, this is for the both of you. What is the biggest challenge brands are facing for achieving traceability at the product level?
Shall I go first on that, Stanley?
Please.
Yeah. So I think there are three big challenges that brands are facing when it comes to traceability at the product level. And by traceability at the product level, I mean tracing all the way down to the raw material. The first is the data just doesn't exist. So one of the global brands we're working with, obviously they know 100% of the manufacturers. They know 100% of the mills who they nominate, but they don't know the facilities. They know only 40% of the facilities. When you go beyond the mills to the spinners, the information just does not exist today. And it does not exist in a digital format and not in any consistent way. So pulling that together is incredibly difficult. The second is convincing the participants to share that data. And because there's no incentive for them to do it, most of these participants, Stanley's invested in systems where you have APIs to export data or to pull data in. Most people, as you move upstream, don't have APIs to feed data, and it's actually manual upload. So incentivizing the participants is the second one. And the third, which is quite important right now, is the goalpost seems to change. So to the best of our understanding, it's been a very few companies have actually met USCBP requirements. So what exactly the regulators want, and I know USCBP has asked for 44 types of documents, from bills of lading to proof of payment to packing lists. But that goalpost seems to change quite a lot. So why are you trying to achieve traceability? Who is the audience? That being really clear about that and what they want is the third challenge I would highlight. Stanley, anything you'd add?
Yeah, I agree with all of you on those few points, but one more maybe cynical point to add is some people actually, are afraid of revealing their dirty laundry, and some brands knowingly, source from factories that may not be doing the right thing, or maybe some factories, are presenting that their things are being made here, but they're actually being made somewhere else. And brands sometimes know it, sometimes they don't, and sometimes they turn a blind eye. And I think those sort of practices still exist in the industry, and to the extent that they do, then a lot of brands are just afraid to let people see those sort of less presentable reality.
I don't think that's cynical at all. I actually do think there are participants in the industry who benefit from the lack of transparency. And so transparency is not in everyone's interest. And I think that is a real challenge. So one European brand over the last few years introduced QR codes on their garments where you can scan them and see where the garment is made. And I was talking to a manufacturer about it, and he said, but that's just a gimmick. We all know they're subcontracted out. So subcontracting is so rampant in the industry that it's really difficult to ascertain where the goods are actually made. So I think lip service to traceability and transparency is easy. Genuine transparency is a real challenge, and it is going to take multiple years. It's not a off-the-shelf silver bullet. And I think that commitment, thankfully now we're seeing many of the leading brands but not everyone in the industry.
Right.
Thank you both. I know that is definitely one of the top concerns that brands and retailers are interested in today. Our next question, Stanley, this is for you, but Vivek, please feel free to chime in. Would you be able to elaborate more on how digitization has been a cost-saving measure for Libra Style?
Traditionally, every time you make an order, let's say 100 units or 1,000,000 units, you actually still need to go through the same pre-production and post-production process. So basically, talking to a customer, basically taking that purchase order, putting that into your system, and then having somebody order fabrics, trims, or whatnot, and then having afterwards, then you have people doing the shipping, you have people doing the sending an invoice out. All those things actually are the same, whether you're selling 100 units or 1,000,000 units. And when you spread that cost over 1,000,000 units, it's negligible. But if you only have your order size is only 100 units, it really adds up. So the digitalization helps reduce the input of data. If things are just done automatically, and let's say there's no need for an accounting department person to do an invoice. The computer just does it for you. All those little things just make things easier. And also things like pattern making. How do you digitalize it so that there's less involvement from the technician? So basically just reducing the amount of non-direct production work related to each order.
And Stanley, you've also been an early adopter of tools like 3D showcasing of your products. Now, especially in a world where you can't travel, because I know your previous life prior to COVID involved living on a plane quite a lot, mainly to meet your customers in many across the world, and that's vanished. So there's probably quite a lot of cost savings with the use of technology to showcase your products and your samples and to virtually engage too.
Right. Definitely for 3D sampling has been 3D design, 3D sampling has been very useful during COVID lockdowns when offices in the West are shut down. However, with the adoption by customers, especially now that especially in the U.S. things are slowly returning to more normal, the adoption by brands of 3D design is still relatively low. However, I think things are moving in the right direction, and things will sort of eventually continue to get back up. And I just want to make one more point about you talk about living on a plane and travel. I think people travel, business travel for two reasons. One is to get stuff done. So I want to go see a factory. I want to go see a show. I want to get some information. I want to kick some tires. I want to go do quality control or something. That's getting stuff, and digitalization and tools, and even tools like Zoom, for example, can help a lot with that. And that kind of travel will go down quite a bit. But another kind of business travel is actually different. It's about sort of building trust. It's about building relationships and developing relationships. And even though you can get on a Zoom and have a Zoom happy hour or whatnot, it doesn't compare to having a glass of wine over a dinner together. And I think that kind of travel is going to remain, maybe not 100% of where it was, but as the bulk of it will still be necessary, And I guess for me, I when I do the traveling, it's not to get stuff done. I've never done a product presentation to a customer. I don't go to factories and negotiate prices. What I do is I go around and meet our business partners, both existing and potential ones, and to see, hey, get a feel of whether these are people that we want to work with, and to develop that relationship so that we can develop new ideas, push the boundaries with them, and they are more likely to be willing to do that with us. So I think there are two kinds of business travel. One will be curtailed quite a bit, while the other one, I think, will still remain.
Agree.
Thank you very much. And our next question, Stanley, earlier you mentioned the goal of digitizing the entire supply chain. How soon does Weaver Style expect to achieve that goal?
It's a goal, but it's a goal that I think is almost like impossible to achieve, because when you say the entire supply chain, it goes all the way. I think it's basically we want to do and I think, I'm sorry if I'm just jumping around a little bit. I think with digitalization nowadays, it's not about, in the past, you want to have a sort of have a prototype, and then it works, and then you perfect it, and then you roll it out. I think nowadays it's actually you do like rapid prototyping, so you just keep on improving, and so when as soon as you get to sort of a minimal standard that you can roll out, just digitalize the supply chain, whatever you at that standard, which is already good enough, and then you keep on improving, throughout the months and years. And so, I mean, the goal of digitalizing everything probably will never be achieved, but you don't have to digitalize everything. Even if you get to 70%, 80, 85, 87, just sort of keep on creeping up is already good enough. And I think that's the way that today's technology companies do it. And I think in the future, apparel companies will need to follow that script as well.
I agree. I think it goes back to, in technology companies, they call it the agile mindset of you get a minimum viable product out there, you test the market. So you take the same approach to digitization. As Stanley made the point, start with the urgent business issues and make sure you digitize what you need to achieve your business objectives. And you have to, digitization will be a journey. It's not an endpoint, because you will have different aspects of your business, different aspects of your relationship, and some of it you don't want to digitize too. So, but I think that's an important bit, which is this is not going to happen in the next year or 2 years, potentially take decades to get to a point where the entire supply chain is genuinely digitized. But what do you want to get done right now? And I think you focus on that.
Great, thank you both. And we'll give our audience members another minute to submit any last questions. But do you both have any final recommendations for brands and retailers looking to digitize?
Stanley, you want to go first?
Sure. Well, I guess my just sharing from experience, just do it. I guess using a Nike tagline. If your business strategy demands it, the longer you wait, the worse off you'll be. It's better to start and experiment. As long as it doesn't cost an arm and a leg, and just embark on the journey. Start today.
So I have two recommendations for brands and retailers. The first is do it with your suppliers as partners, as opposed to don't, because genuine digitization of as you work through your process requires your manufacturers, your mills, your spinners to all come on board. So engage them in the process and understand their pain points, because if it's done to them, they will do as much as you ask them to, but no more. And it won't be proactive, and it'll stall. Their efforts will stall. So make sure you engage your supply chain as partners in this process. And the second, pragmatically and very self-servingly, come talk to us at SOI about how we can help you with that as practical advice for your digitization efforts.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us today. We are going to conclude today's webinar on that note. And as a quick reminder to our audience members, you will receive a follow-up email containing the slide deck and a recording from today's program. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any additional questions. You can always contact us at USFIA directly by emailing us at info@usfashionindustry.com. So thanks again, Vivek and Stanley, so much. And thank you to our audience members for joining us. And we look forward to hosting you all at the next USFIA event. Have a great evening for you both, and rest of the day for our audience members.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.